Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our literacy lesson today, where we're going to be learning another skill that we need for a recount. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen with you. And to warm us up this morning, I've got a piece of text here that sort of jumps between past tense and present tense. So I'd like you to edit this paragraph so that it is in past tense. You don't need to write out the full paragraph in your book. You can just write the corrections. So, for example, you could, in your book, write the correct word. So the earth shakes. If I wanted to make that past tense, it would be shook. The earth shook. So you can just write in your book that the correct word that should have gone there would be shook. Okay, so I'd like you to go through and edit to correct it so that it is in past tense. Once you've done that, come back and press play. Okay, so hopefully you went through. Let me just quickly go through with the corrections that we need. So we've got, the earth shook so violently that I thought the buildings might come down on top of us. People are screaming. Well, it wouldn't be are if it is in past tense. It would be were. So that should be were screaming. We're screaming and dashing to find safety. I struggles to stand. It wouldn't be struggles. It would be struggled, past tense. So I'm just going to bring that one in here. Struggled. Okay, let me put that in red. I struggled to stand as the ground buckled beneath me. Past tense would be buckled, having a D on the end, buckled. Okay. So the ground buckled underneath me. Then suddenly a nearby huge wall crumbles and falls. Okay, well, let's fix up those two. It should be, we've got crumbled, past tense, ELD. And I'll put that in red so we can see it. It crumbled, and it wouldn't be fold, it would be fell, past tense. And fell to the ground as a huge cloud of dust shotted. No, this one's just an incorrect word. It's not shotted, it would just be shot. Past tense of shoot is to shot, sorry. As dust shot into the sky, it was hard to breathe. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Now, the word here, pounding, that's absolutely fine as present tense because the past tense here was I could. That's the past tense in the sentence. So it's perfect present tense. So I could feel my heart. Lovely, well done. Hopefully you got all of those words. And if you didn't, just make sure you write down the correct word in your book. So today we're going to be focusing on repetition, okay? And using repetition to create an effect on the reader, all right? So let's have a look at the repetition in our learned text. At the very start of the recount of the tsunami, it said, "It was a day I will never forget, a day that changed my life, a day that will haunt me forever. That morning I woke up to the sound of the gentle waves crashing against the shore. I was on holiday with my family on an idyllic island in the beautiful Thailand. Life couldn't be better. Feeling content, I was looking forward to a relaxing day at the beach." Okay, so did you spot the repetition at the start of the paragraph? So it says, a day I will never forget, a day that changed my life, and a day that will haunt me forever. What effect does that have on the person reading the text when you hear, so excuse me, I just dropped my paper. When you hear that repetition, a day I will never forget, a day that changed my life, a day that will haunt me forever. So you can pause the video if you need a little bit of time to think. What's the effect of that? Okay, well, it really emphasizes the point that it was a bad day. A day you'll never forget, a day that changed your life, a day that will haunt you forever. It's just creating this sense of foreboding, like you're anxious about what you're about to read, because it must be really bad if they had to stress it over and over. So repetition is used to make a point, emphasize something in particular, okay? And it's also used in this particular paragraph because it contrasts with the next bit of information. This bit here makes me nervous, makes me feel like, oh goodness, this is going to be a really horrible thing that this person experienced. And then directly after that, they write, it was a beautiful day and there was gentle waves crashing on the shore, idyllic island in Thailand. So it's a bit of like sharp contrast to like keep my reader hooked and interested, okay? So why do writers use repetition? Well, let's look at some examples. So I've got the start of a book called A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. The very start of the book says, it was the best of times. Oops, I completely messed that one up, didn't I? The best of times and the worst of times. It is really hard to use this pen. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, okay? So this does a great bit of repetition here of times being repeated, and it really helps to emphasize the contrast between the positives and the negatives. We've also got another book example. It comes from a book called The Great Gatsby, and at the start of this book it says, the apartment was on the top floor, a small living room, a small dining room, a small bedroom, and a bath. So what's the repeated word there? Well, we've got a small living room, a small dining room, and a small bedroom. So they're repeating the word small, and it's emphasizing that this apartment is really tiny. You can really picture that it's really, really like cozy is a nice way to say it, but maybe a bit cramped and uncomfortable because it's really small. So repetition can be used to create an image in somebody's mind to have an effect on the reader, and we're going to be doing that using both pictures today and words. Okay, so let's have a go. So I've got a picture on the board now. It's like a mystical fairy tale. It is a gloomy green forest, okay, and I'm going to try to figure out what could I repeat for emphasis in this picture. So first I'm going to try and figure out what is something in the picture that I could discuss or talk about and repeat, okay? So for example, I could see there's very, very tall trees, okay? So the first thing might be the trees. I can see that there are some lovely trees that I could repeat, okay? I could maybe do, it's gloomy, the gloom. I could maybe refer to the gloom because you can see it's quite dark, it's not easy to see. Or maybe instead of gloom, I could also use maybe light. I'm trying to pick something about the picture that I could talk about that's like the point of the picture. These are the big obvious things. Like I wouldn't talk about the grass in this picture because the picture's clearly not about grass. It's about these gloomy, moody trees in the dark forest. Okay, so using that, I could create the beginning of a fairy tale using one of these. So the tall trees pressed all around. Trees. Oh, I can't spell trees. Trees. Needs to be good. Higher than a building. Trees. Oh my goodness, I did it again. Let me just move this up and I'll make it a bit smaller so I can fit it. Trees that made me nervous. Okay, so let's have a look at the beginning of my fairy tale that I've written. I could have the tall trees pressed all around, trees higher than a building, trees that made me nervous. So I've used one of the main parts of this picture to create a beginning of a story that now in the reader's mind, they understand that there's loads of trees all around them, that they're really enclosed in, they're surrounded by trees, okay? I could do the same thing. Let me put that one up there with my tree. Oh, can't do it. There we go. Tree one. I could also do the same thing using the light or the gloom. Okay, so I want to try to think, what kind of effect am I wanting my reader to feel? Am I wanting them to feel nervous? Am I wanting them to feel excited and happy? Am I wanting them to feel like a sense of foreboding, like something bad's about to happen? So I want to try to pick. Now, I'm going to, because it's a dark picture, I'm going to stick to this idea of gloomy, scary, a bit uncomfortable. So I might do, so gloom surrounded the forest. A gloom so thick you couldn't see. I'll just come across. Gloom that made your skin crawl. So Again, I've repeated it 3 times. Gloom surrounded the forest, a gloom so thick you couldn't see, gloom that made your skin crawl. Okay, so I've just repeated myself there to create this sense of like eeriness, that you now understand that the gloom, that the inability to see very far makes it very uncomfortable. You feel nervous in there. So that's how we create repetition. We pick something from the picture to use to repeat over and over to really make the reader feel a certain emotion. Okay, so in this case, I've made them feel nervous. The tall trees pressed all around, trees higher than a building, trees that made me nervous. Or gloom surrounded the forest, a gloom so thick you couldn't see, gloom that made your skin crawl. Okay, so we're going to have a practice together now. I've got another picture, okay, and we're going to see if we could identify what things we could maybe write, what could we repeat to really emphasize. So I would like you to pause the video and discuss with a partner or think out loud what things in this picture might we be able to repeat and to create an effect on the reader. Okay, so just discussing, not writing anything yet. So pause the video, have a think or a discuss with somebody near you. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you've had a go. So what things could we maybe repeat to really emphasize? Well, huge. So we've got large. We could talk about like the size of this particular building. So for example, we could discuss how huge, because if you look at this little woman down here, she's quite small compared to the house. So we could maybe have a few sentences about how large it is. The building was so big, it made me feel like an ant. Okay, so big that I could not even see the tallest part of it. So big that, and you can make a comparison, maybe use a simile or a metaphor. Okay, we could maybe talk about, we've got all this beautiful light up here. Okay, so let me just draw a picture here. So we've got all this lovely light here. So maybe you could talk about the shimmering light. The warm light glinted off the windows of the house. The light filled the space around me, making me feel fantastic. Okay, so now that I've picked something, I'm going to write about the size of the building. So if I was setting up this story, it was a new fairy tale that I was about to write a narrative for. I've now chosen something. I'm going to write about the size, how large it is. So I'm going to come across to my book. First thing I need is my date, because I completely forgot to do that. So it's Thursday, the 25th of February, 2021. Okay, and we are doing repetition. So in my book, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that picture here to introduce. I'm imagining I'm about to write a fairy tale about this picture here, okay? And I want to introduce the story using a bit of repetition, and I'm using the word large. So I'm going to write large here, or you can use a synonym, maybe huge. Okay, so now I'm going to use 3 sentences. I'm going to repeat the word large 3 times. To really emphasize to the reader how big this house is. Okay. The house in the woods was so large that clouds covered the top. Oh dear, I forgot to go on every second line. Make sure that you go on to every second line. I've made a mistake. So large that it made everything else look small. And I'm repeating myself again with that so large, and I'm going to use a metaphor here. I was an ant next to it. Okay, so I've got 3 sentences and I've repeated this phrase, so large, and so large. So your turn now. I'd like you to use this picture and I'd like you to use the word light or large and write a repeating sentences. I would like you to repeat it 3 times in your introduction. It could be about anything. You're not writing a story. You just have to write these 3 sentences to introduce the story or set the scene. Okay, so pause the video, go away and do that. Once you've done that, come back and press play. Okay, welcome back. So now it's your turn. So I've got 3 pictures on the board. Okay, one of a woman in some fields, one of some gruesome or ugly looking monsters, and one of a crowd of people. Okay, so I would like you to write a small introduction, only 3 sentences, that uses a repeating pattern in those sentences. So first, remember, first you identify something in the picture to talk about. Maybe, for example, in the first one, you could do alone. She was alone in the woods, alone in the vast landscape. So alone, no one else was around. I don't know. You can have a go at that. So maybe you could do alone. Maybe for the next one, you could do they were so ugly. Ugly enough to scare even a boggart, for example. Or maybe in the third one, you could do the crowd. There's a big crowd, okay? The crowd pressed in from all sides. The crowd became angry. So you could just repeating that word. So first, I've given you one example for each one, but maybe you can come up with a different word for each picture, okay? Up to you, but I'd like you to pause the video and write an introduction for each of these stories that uses repetition. Okay, so 3 sentences for each picture, please, using 1 repeated word. Okay, once you've done that, come back and press play. All right, so hopefully you have now written an introduction, and I'm sure your teachers will be very excited to hear your repetition this afternoon in your call with your teacher. So now we're going to move on to a recount introduction. So in our recounts, we've been looking at tsunamis or earthquakes. Okay, and we can see the destruction here after an earthquake's happened. This house was so damaged that they're having to tear it down. So in this introduction, we had a day that I will never forget, a day that changed my life, and a day that will haunt me forever. So what we're going to do is we're going to think, if you were writing about living through a tsunami, what word could you use instead of day? Okay, so for example, I'll help you out for the first one. You might say instead about a night. It was a night I would never forget. A night that lives in my memory forever. A night I will never escape. Okay, so what other words can you think of? So you can pause the video if you need a little bit of time. But I'd like you to try and come up with some other words to describe living through a tsunami. Okay, once you've done that, come back and press play. All right, so maybe we could say it was the moment that changed my life, the experience that shaped my future, the tragedy that I lived through. So all of these words would be a great word to repeat to introduce our recount next week. Okay, they're all fantastic. So what we're going to do with these words is we're going to come up with some possible introductions to a recount. Okay, so we're going to write just the introduction. Okay, so we've got the word day, night, moment, experience, and tragedy. So coming over to my book, I'm going to do the first one first. Okay, so the word is day. I'm just going to write it up. So you're going to write that in your book, and underneath you're going to write 3 repeating sentences that introduces living through a tsunami. Okay, so I don't want to use these sentences here. I don't want to use these sentences here because I've already got them. So I'm going to try and use sentences that are different. So the day that ruined my life. The day that ruined my life will affect me forever. The day that ruined my life will affect me forever. The day, that day will never be forgotten. The day the tsunami hit. Tsunami hit. Okay, that would be my introduction using the word day. The day that ruined my life will affect me forever. That day will never be forgotten. The day the tsunami hit. Awesome. So I've done the first one. Now I'm going to do night. I'm going to assume it was nighttime. So I'm going to write the word night. And I'm going to write a little introduction to a tsunami as though it happened at night. So I will never forget that night. And I want to think of another sentence using the word night, maybe the screams from that night. I can still hear the screams of the night. I'm trying to make my reader a bit nervous or afraid. I can still hear the screams from that night. And again, I need one more sentence using that night, okay? So I've got, I will never forget that night. I can still hear the screams from that night. Maybe it'll haunt me forever. It will live with me forever. It forever affected me. Still hear the screams from that night. I will never forget the night you could say I lived through a tsunami. I lost my sister. I don't know. Maybe if your sister died in the tsunami. Okay. But again, I've used the word night. So both of these, when I do my writing next week, our shared write about living through a tsunami, I might be able to reuse some of these. Okay. So your job now, your task is I would like you to use these words on the screen: day, night, moment, experience, and tragedy, to write an introduction to a recount. All right, just like I've done in my book, just like these two. But then I want you to use the word moment. Okay, it was a moment I will never forget, a moment that changed everything. Okay, one moment that ruined the rest of my life, whatever it is. Okay. And then use experience and tragedy. Try to come up with as many different sentences as you can, because then you can use them next week and the week after when we do our shared and independent writing. Okay, so you can pause the video, do that, and once you've finished writing those, come back and press play. All right, well done if you've done that. That is the end of our lesson today. So I hope you've enjoyed using repetition to create a mood, to make our reader feel something. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow when we'll be going to do our British Values Day. So there's no literacy tomorrow, and next literacy lesson will be on Monday. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you soon. Bye.